Dear colleagues, today is the 26th of June, 2020, noon sharp, and we shall continue a session that was postponed 1 week ago on the 19th for technical reasons. The technical break is over, and I declare the session resumed. Today, we shall consider at this session of the Dissertation Council as a thesis by Jiang Xuehua, the degree of Candidate of Philological Sciences, Academic Specialization 10-0201, Russian language, on the theme Chinese borrowings in the language of the Russian immigrants on the basis of memoir, prose, first half of the 20th century. And our session is open. On the order, St. Petersburg University, the 27th of March 2020, number 24/1, me, Bogdanova Beglarya Natalia Viktorovna, Doctor of Philological Sciences, Professor of the Russian Language Department of St. Petersburg University, was appointed Chairman of this Dissertation Council. Members of the Dissertation Council were appointed by the same order. Let me introduce them. Under the order of St. Petersburg University of the 23rd of March 2020, number 2304/1, our meeting is held in the remote access mode, which includes my colleagues, members of the Council. First of all, Tatiana Igorovna Afanasieva, Doctor of Philological Sciences, Professor of the Russian Language Department of St. Petersburg University. Tatiana Igorovna, can you see? Can you hear us? Yes, I can see and hear you. Thank you. Yelena Ivanova Siliverstova, Doctor of Philological Sciences, Professor, acting head of the Russian Language Department for Humanities and Natural Sciences of St. Petersburg University. Yelena Ivanovna, can you see? Can you hear us? Yes, I can see and hear you. Thank you. Marina Nikolaevna Priyomisheva, Doctor of Philological Sciences, Senior Researcher of the Institute of Linguistic Studies of the Russian Academy of Sciences. Marina Nikolaevna was unable to attend today, and I shall read her review, so she is not present. Lou Depain, Doctor of Philological Sciences, Professor of the Institute of European Languages and Culture of Guangdong University of Foreign Languages and Foreign Trade, China. Lulu Payne, can you see? Can you hear us? Yes, I can see and hear you very well. Thank you. And the degree applicant, today's session, Jiang Xuehua, can you see? Can you hear us? Yes, I can see and hear you well. Thank you. Also, here is the academic advisor of the degree applicant, Tatiana Vsevolodovna Rojdestenskaya, Doctor of Philological Sciences, Professor of the Russian Language Department of St. Petersburg University. Tatiana Vsevolodovna, can you see and hear us? Yes, I can see and hear you. Thank you. So, all the members except for Marina Nikolaevna, all the members of the station and the degree applicant are present, and we can all see and hear each other. Dear colleagues, since our meeting is held in the remote access mode under St. Petersburg order, University order I mentioned already, I invite all the participants to watch the procedure carefully. In case there's a technical failure and they stop seeing or hearing someone, please inform me immediately. I shall call it technical break until such issues are eliminated. If the connection with me is lost, I would like to ask Tatiana Igorovna Afanasieva, who's next on the list, to call a technical break. And if the connection with me cannot be restored, to lead the meeting further according to the procedure. Tatiana Igorovna, do you agree? Yes, I have all the necessary documents. Thank you. Dear council members, do you mind this decision? No, we don't mind. We are for this decision. Please remember to switch on your microphones. Yelena Ivanovna, I don't mind. Let us continue. To improve the quality of communication, dear colleagues, please switch off your microphones while not speaking, but please remember to switch them on when you are given the floor. Let me also inform you that our meeting is being broadcast online at St. Petersburg University website. The speeches are being simultaneously translated from Russian into English, or from English into Russian, which in our case is probably not, obviously non-applicable. The applicant's page at the university website currently displays an email address to which, during our session, all the listeners of online broadcast can send their opinions and questions online. Questions should be related to the thesis and the ongoing scientific discussion of the report. Our technical department shall forward these questions to me, and I shall present them during the discussion part. Questions should be related strictly to the applicant's report and thesis. It's also necessary to indicate a full name, position, and employer of the author of the question. Questions that are not related to the scientific discussion of the thesis, to the contents of the thesis and evaluation of it shall not be presented. In accordance with the order on awarding at St. Petersburg University academic degrees of Candidate of Science and Doctor of Science approved by the local regulations of St. Petersburg University, hereinafter referred to as the order, a session of the Dissertation Council is considered completed if at least 2/3 of the approved composition of the Dissertation Council, but not less than four persons, are present. Our Dissertation Council consists of 5 members, 4 are present, all in the remote interactive mode. We have the quorum and we may start our work. Audio-visual contact has been established with all the council members and the degree applicant. Thus, let us start. I instruct the curator of today's defense officer of the Dissertation Council Activity Support Department, Yekaterina Vyacheslavna Sazonova, to draw up the attendance list in which the Dissertation Council members present shall be recorded, and to indicate their work mode, in this case, remote. Let me set forth the following procedure of today's session of the Dissertation Council, the total duration of approximately 2 hours. I will read the 14 points. First, the chairman's summary report on the main content of documents submitted by the applicant and their compliance with the applicable regulations, and answers to possible questions, if any. Second, brief presentation of the degree applicant outlining the key points of her study. No more than 15 minutes, Xuehua, no more than 15 minutes. 3, questions to the degree applicant strictly related to her report. 4, answers of the degree applicant to these questions, if any. Speeches of all members of the Dissertation Council in turn, with their evaluation of the thesis, and speech of the degree applicant with a summary of their position. Questions and suggestions to the degree applicant, no more than 10 minutes for each council member. Speech of the chairman with her assessment, no more than 10 minutes. 7, final answers of the degree applicant to questions asked. 8, presentation of questions sent online during the scientific discussion while the session is being broadcast online at St. Petersburg University website, if any. 10, speech of the academic advisor of the degree applicant, Tatiana Vsevolodin, not more than 3 minutes. Discussion by the members of the Dissertation Council before open voting of the results of the defense session, during which sound shall be switched off. We shall have about 5 minutes to discuss results of the defense 12. open individual vote, counting votes. Results shall be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. Then making decision on awarding or not awarding the academic degree as a Petersburg University, and closing remarks of the degree applicant. Dear colleagues, do you have any questions regarding this procedure? Please switch your microphones and say, no, I don't have. Lufein, do you have I don't have any questions, comments either. If there are no questions, let me start running the procedure, but please remember to switch off your mobile phones. Thank you for your understanding. If your mobile phone is near you, please mute it. The floor is given to the academic advisor of Jiang Xuehua, Doctor of Philological Sciences, Professor of the Russian Language Department, Tatiana Vsevolodovna. Please introduce, do not characterize. This is not real review, just an introduction. Welcome, Tatiana Vsevolodovna. Yes, this is should be item 12. Just introduce Jiang Xuehua, as it is written here. Our degree applicant became a student at our department, and I must say, just introduce Jiang Xuehua. If I'm given the floor, please allow me to say, you'll be given the floor again. Here, let me introduce to you the work of my doctoral student who took up a doctoral course at our department. The subject theme of her thesis is relevant and not very well developed in the light of study of the Russian language of the Russian-speaking immigrant community, and how successful she is up to you to decide. Thank you, Tatiana Vsevolodovna. Now I have to take the floor to make a summary report on the thesis by Jiang Xuehua for the degree of Candidate of Philological Sciences, Academic Specialization 10-0201, Russian Language, on the theme Chinese borrowings in the language of the Russian immigrants on the basis of memoir prose of the first half of the 20th century, was accepted for defense by the order of the Academic Secretary of St. Petersburg University on the 3rd of February 2020, number 610/1. Jiang Xuehua wrote her thesis at St. Petersburg University under the guidance of, as you know already, Doctor of Philological Sciences, Professor of the Russian Language Department of St. Petersburg University, Tatiana Vsevolodovna. A number of applicants' publications which set out the main scientific results of her thesis, according to the list presented, is 4. In journals, scientific journals from the list approved by the Ministry of Education and Science of the Russian Federation, 4 publications. In journals indexed in the Web of Science and Scopus Scientometric databases, no publications. The applicant submitted to the Academic Secretary of St. Petersburg University a full package of documents for acceptance of the thesis for consideration and defense. All the documents comply with Article 12 of Section 3 of the order. All the documents submitted by the applicant, according to the information I received from the curator, comply with the requirements and are kept in the applicant's attestation file. Copies are available from the officer of the Dissertation Council Support Department. Curator of today's session, Yekaterina Vyacheslavorovna Sazonova, who is currently in touch with us. Before I give the floor to the applicant, do you, dear council members, have any general questions to the applicant, including whether it is necessary to disclose and review the entire list of documents submitted by the applicant for defense. Please switch on your microphones and say yes or no. Dear colleagues, no, we don't have any questions. Le Pen, is it necessary to add something? No, it's not necessary. No, all is well. We have no questions. Let me give the floor to the degree applicant, Jiang Xuehua. You have 15 minutes, not more. Jiang Xuehua, the floor is yours. You have a presentation. Yes. So please start your presentation and please make sure everybody can see it. Colleagues, can you all see everything? Can you see my presentation? Yes, I can. Elena Ivanovna, can you see? Yes, I can. Can you see? Yes, I can. Okay, then please start. Dear Chairman and members of the Dissertation Council, first of all, let me thank you for participation in this session. Thank you, everybody. Let me introduce my work. My work is dedicated to the description of the Chinese borrowings in the speech of the Russian immigrant community of the first half of the 20th century and laws in the field of lexicology of the modern Russian language, namely in the field of theory of borrowings. Borrowing is an integral part of the process of functioning and historical change of the language. One of the main sources of vocabulary replenishment. In our work, we use a broad concept of Sinicism, and it means both lexical units borrowed directly from the Chinese language. I beg your pardon. Directly from Chinese and vocabulary of Chinese origin that came into the Russian language indirectly through Turkic, Western European languages, etc. Some of these borrowings are reflected in dictionaries of the modern Russian language, definition, foreign word, etc., and others do not yet have lexicographic fixation. I beg your pardon. The scientific novelty of my research is determined by the fact that for the first time a complex, multi-aspect linguistic analysis of Sinicism isolated on the material my presentation is not showing well. So maybe you continue without your presentation. Just don't switch to the full screen mode. If that is okay. Yes, that is okay. Yes, we can all see your presentation. Let me continue. The scientific novelty of my research is determined by the fact that for the first time a complex, multi-aspect linguistic analysis of Sinicism isolated on the material of memoir and fiction of the Russian immigrant community in China, the first half of the 20th century. These texts have not been previously analyzed. In particular, they study the borrowings of Sinicism. The object just leave it as it is. The object of my study the object of my study is lexical units from Chinese, a language which is not closely related to Russia, on a little studied material, the language of the Russian immigrant community in China. The subject of our study is the penetration of Sinicism in the Russian language, the mechanisms of adaptation of vocabulary of Chinese origin at various levels, as well as the role of Sinicism in the linguistic consciousness of Russian native speakers. The purpose of our research is identification and multi-aspect linguistic analysis of the corpus of Sinicism in the language of the Russian immigrant community in China, the study of patterns of borrowing and adaptation of these lexical units. To achieve this goal, the following tasks have been set. First, to describe the theoretical basis of the study and the main discussion points of the theory of borrowing. Second, to select lexical units of Chinese borrowing from the memoir literature of the Russian immigrant community. Next, to study the features of the Chinese loanwords entering the Russian language. 4. To carry out classification of the lexical items of Chinese origin according to different criteria, sources, time of enter, type, etc. 5. Figure out the source, time of entry into the Russian language or origin of Sinicism using a number of different dictionaries of the Russian language and the material of the national corpus of the Russian language. Next, describe the lexical thematic group of Sinicism characteristic of the Russian immigrant community in China. And finally, to examine the phonetic, graphic, morphological, and semantic adaptation of Sinicism in the Russian language on the basis of literature of the Russian immigrant community. Pay special attention to presentation of significant changes given non-related Chinese and Russian languages, phonetic graphic transfer of the Chinese proper names by means of the Russian phonetic and graphic system. The following propositions are submitted for defense. First, in the memoir literature of the Russian immigrant community in China, borrowings from different languages, different ways, both direct and indirect, from the analyzed words of the Chinese origin. Most of the loan words enter the Russian language directly. For example, Kun-kus, literally red-bearded member of the armed gangs that operated in Manchuria from the middle of the 19th century until the victory of the revolution in China. There are two indirect loan words, European languages and Turkic languages act as intermediaries. For example, the word soy was borrowed into the Russian language from the English language. Initially, the name of this plant came from the Chinese word shu, which means a big bean. The way of borrowing was the following. The Russian word soy was borrowed from English. And later was used in English, then entered the Russian language. Second, in Russian immigrant community literature in China, one can distinguish different types of lexical borrowings depending on their sources and ways of entering the Russian language, the linguistic type, and belonging to a certain thematic group, as well as the degree of the borrowings, oral words prevail. It's been mastered for a long time and they're well known in the Russian language. there are actually loanwords, a number of barbarisms, and a significant number of exotisms. 3. The methods of borrowing in memoir literature are transcription and calquing. The Russian memoir literature contains many proper names that transfer a rendering which, in Russian, provides material for the study of the process of phonetic and graphic assimilation of cynicism on the Russian soil. 4. Borrowed words and expressions are subject to certain phonetic, morphological, word formation, and lexical semantic changes in the Russian language. When borrowing cynicism, especially difficult is the transfer of phonetic and graphic system of the language, which are not closely related. A number of regularities in the transmission of sound common nouns and proper names of the Chinese origin can be identified. When word forming development from borrowed bases, the corresponding relative adjectives and noun are most often formed. The results of such research can be used in lexicography. While compiling dictionaries of foreign words as well as cynicisms that have entered the Russian language, perhaps relevant for the modern language, as well as linguistic and cultural dictionaries, and the university practice in the educational process, in teaching courses in general linguistics, cultural studies, linguistic commentary, linguistic analysis of the literary text. And as far as I have managed to achieve the goals set in my work is up to my respected opponents and members of the Dissertation Council to judge. Yes, that's all. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your presentation, dear members of the Dissertation Council. You have the opportunity to ask questions, but strictly on the degree applicant's report. So maybe you have any questions? Lifen, do you have any questions? No questions at this point. Tatiana Igorevna? Ivanova? No, I have no questions. Okay, then let us proceed to Jiang Xuehua. We received one external review from Elena Innokentivna Zinovieva, Doctor of Philological Sciences, Professor of the Russian Language Department, as Russian as Foreign Language Department, and Methods of Teaching at St. Petersburg University. Let me read this review. I will read only the key points of the position and all the questions and comments, because all the reviews, including this one, have been published at our university website. Elena Innokentivna believes that the relevance of the theme of the thesis is beyond any doubt, since borrowings from a non-related language of hieroglyphic type is a difficult subject, but Jiang Xuehua was brave. The work, according to Elena, again goes beyond the outline source base. Remember, memoir prose of the Russian emigre community of the end of the 19th, early first half of the 20th century. As a result, the conclusions can be extrapolated to the Russian language, which, according to Elena, is both an advantage and a drawback of the thesis, because this results to unjustified generalizations. I will expand on that. The theoretical basis, according to Elena Innokentivna, is logical. In the first chapter, it is outlined. The second chapter deals with direct and indirect borrowed words. All these borrowed words have been studied in detail. The third chapter is dedicated to adaptation of cynicism in the Russian language. And another positive point, I was impressed with the consideration of the etymology of individual words based on authoritative research. Particularly noteworthy are such entrance studies as the proof of the false origin of the Chinese word Mandarin in the meaning of official, page 69. The description of the word formation calking, spodný on page 80. The as an application dictionary found in the memoir literature of the Russian emigre community. In general, she thinks that all the tasks set in the thesis have been fulfilled, but she has quite a number of critical comments and questions, which hopefully Xuehua will be able to answer. First, on page 86, the author writes, I'm quoting, barbarisms include Chinese words or expressions not included in the lexical system of the Russian language or have been partly included but are transmitted with letters of the Russian language. The question is it legal to refer to this classify the units not included as Russian as borrowings? This is especially true of the group that the author calls expanded barbarisms, page 87. It means whole phrases from the Chinese language, sometimes of the dialect nature. Is this not a case of mixture of languages among immigrants who were constantly forced to switch from one language to another and who had to learn the Chinese language? Second comment, on pages 90-91, the author shows thematic groups of borrowings. Are these thematic or lexical semantic groups? Quoting again, this designation of institution, designation of household items, of fabrics and clothing, food and drinks, musical instruments, etc. Are these thematic or lexical semantic groups? 3. Can I refer to borrowings or exoticism as Xuehua, proper names and geographical names? It's very interesting to carefully consider the issues of rendering them in Russian, but are these borrowed words? 4. The author rightly states that narrowing or expanding the value of the borrowed words in the recipient language. And do the text understudy confirm this? When reading the thesis as a whole, I didn't have enough reliance on context from analyzed sources. For example, the degree of adaptation of a borrowed word can be decided on whether the language unit is explained in parentheses. 5. Can we talk about the use of cynicism in memoir literature of a certain period, about its entry into the Russian language and its fixation? And 3 more comments given by Elena Inokentivna. The tasks, in my opinion, lack the final generalizing tasks. Second, there are some inaccuracies in the use of terms. For example, the methods of component, lexical, and semantic analysis, the method of using the lexicographic data and contextual environment of a language unit are not the general scientific methods. On page 88, we read about exoticism. All these words belong in Russian to the non-equivalent vocabulary, denoting specific phenomena of the Chinese life. This is in Chinese. They belong to the non-equivalent vocabulary relative to the Russian language. And there is one more comment on the design of the thesis. There are many grammatical errors and typos, but these comments do not affect the overall positive impression of Jiang Xuehua work. The goal has been achieved and the propositions submitted for defense have been proved. And in the end, Elena concludes that the thesis by Jiang Xuehua on the theme that is already known to you corresponds to the basic requirements established by the order, the 1st of September 2016, number 6821/1, on the procedure for awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University. And the degree applicant Jiang Xuehua deserves to be awarded the degree of Candidate of Philological Sciences, Special 100201, Russian language. Article 11 of the specified order has not been violated by the degree applicant. This is a review by Elena Inakintina. Now you have the opportunity to answer all her questions and comments. Can I answer all the questions and comments? External review, you have to answer separately. Okay, I see. Okay, so I'd like to thank for these comments and questions. And I had to define the lexical, semantic, and the thematic groups. A lexical semantic group is understood as a unit, or lexical units, which have the same and the same meaning. As the main feature of the lexical semantic group is the archesema, which is often called the basic semantic component. When defining a lexical semantic group, it's important that such group unites words of the same subject. So we use the lexical semantic group, while the main features which unite the described lexema are non-linguistic features, a connection with denoted reality, meaning component. This ambiguity in the modern Russian studies, terminology, the lexicosemantic group, and the lexicosemantic group can be defined as, but in our case, the term semantic group seems to be more accurate, and the division of words in thematic groups allows us to suppose the most significant spheres on the acceptor language, and the level of knowledge of the recipient language, the basis for defining thematic groups is of the world united by a particular feature defined by different words. And the second question of barbarisms, especially of expanded, but of course barbarisms cannot be regarded as elements of the recipient language. However, this is explained in the paper. On page 38 of the thesis, we emphasize that, strictly speaking, barbarisms can only be conditionally attributed to loan vocabulary. They have a limited sphere of use and in fact remain outside the Russian dictionary. Other borrowings, barbarisms differ from other borrowings in that they have a foreign, not Russian appearance that sharply distinguishes them from the Russian vocabulary. Thus, we don't in any way claim that barbarisms are full-fledged borrowings, but as foreign language inclusions, they cannot be described in the work on borrowed vocabulary. It is as foreign words and expressions that occur in the Russian text, but are fundamentally different from other borrowings in terms of degree of inclusion. Barbarisms are described in the work. The line that separates texts that are a mixture of several languages and texts that include barbarisms is always very thin and quite conventional. See, for example, the so-called Polonized text, the concept of macaronic style, etc. We distinguish elements indicated as Chinese barbarism precisely because the main text is written in Russian, but for certain fragments of memoir literature, perhaps, we should recognize the validity of your remark. And the third question is about the judgment or extension of the meaning of a borrowed word in the recipient language. The judgment or extension of the meaning of borrowed word is not fully studied in the memoir texts. For example, the word gobi was originally, it's gebi in Chinese, was originally borrowed in the sense of a waterless place, a stretch of desert. And the same phonetic and graphic appearance, the word gobi, the original Chinese guobi, which means yuan manchuko, was borrowed into the Russian language with the meaning, the official name of a local money. That was what was in circulation in the first half of the 20th century in the northeastern China, and most approved by dictionaries of different periods. And thank you for your comments. In the future, we'll extend the materials to provide the necessary basis. Thank you, Jiang Xuehua. Hopefully, Elena Innocentivna is satisfied with the answers to all her questions. Let us proceed to the official discussion of the thesis. Let me remind you that you should only read the key points, strong points. So please do not reduce the negative part. Tatiana Igorevna Afanasieva, please start. Okay. The thesis of Jiang Xuehua is devoted to the description of lexical cynicism and prose of Russian writers in the first phase of immigration. These sources have not been studied by linguists before, so the research conducted by the author is undoubtedly new. The relevance of the work is seen in the fact that in the modern world, in particular in Russia, the economic relations and cultural exchange with China is taken large scale. So the study of borrowings from the Chinese language is becoming increasingly important. The thesis has been performed. A good source-based observations were made on the memoir text presented in 24 books published in the post-Soviet period. In the introduction, the author formulates the purpose of the study. Here, I'd like to say that as cynicism, the author understands in a broad sense, both from the genetic point of view, from the point of penetration into the Russian language. The first chapter is theoretical. It provides a good overview of the main provisions of the theory of borrowing. This chapter also contains excursions into the history of the Russian-Chinese relations, which is very interesting, which shows how cynicism penetrated the Russian language. The second and third chapters focus on the study of cynicism in the language of writers of the Russian immigrant community. The author studies both direct borrowings and borrowings that entered the Russian language from other languages of a multi-ethnic and multilingual Chinese state, and indirect Sinicism that came through Western European languages. In a word, the complex of complex analysis. The most interesting Sinicism are those used in the prose of the Russian immigrant community, but unfortunately, not much space is given to such words. Very interesting semantic calking is by Natalia. Have you eaten today? As a label formula. How are you? The exoticism and barbarism used in this prose are important as living manifestation. The table of fixing Sinicism in dictionaries of the Russian language of the 19th, 20th century on pages 70 to 72. However, it is not clear why the names of rivers are considered exoticism, as well as lakes and names of lakes and mountains. The author believes they belong to non-equivalent vocabulary and denote specific phenomena of the Chinese life, with which I cannot agree. So hopefully the author will answer this comment. So I am starting my comments. The lack of separation of Sinicism, which entered the Russian language in general, and Sinicism used by the Russian emigre writers. So the thesis is full of information that has long been known. For example, historical Sinicism known in the Russian since ancient times. If the author focused more on Sinicism of the Russian emigre era of the 20th of the 20th century, borrowings from that period would be more visible and would be possible to compare with words borrowed earlier, 17th and 19th century. And so the author also does not try to characterize the material in any way. Who were the authors who wrote those memoirs? How long have they been in China? What did they do there? How they learned the Chinese language and how good they were at it. After all, characteristic of sources make it possible to make more precise linguistic conclusions, to show the dynamics of borrowings depending on the personality of the writer. No conclusions are drawn about the relationship between the command of the Chinese language and the use of Sinicism in the works of the Russian emigre writers in China. Here I'm talking of referring to the works of Zemskaya. So the poorer the command of a foreign language, the more borrowings a person uses. The annex to the thesis is a glossary consisting of 366 words recorded in the studied works. 100 of them are exoticism, denoting objects and phenomena from the life of another nation. 39 of them have been recorded in Russian dictionaries of the 19th century, which means they have already entered the Russian language, which is proved by the table I have already mentioned. Others can be considered as Sinicisms, which are typical of the prose of the Russian immigrant community. Unfortunately, the author doesn't give a special name to these words. Though this is stated as the goal of the work, the other 266 words from the glossary are various names such as anthroponyms, toponyms, names of institutions, temples, books, and newspapers. Should these words be considered as borrowings at all, because they have never entered the Russian language in dictionaries, they have only been used by Russian emigre writers. Of course, this glossary is significance for Sinicism written, but these comments did not produce the positive impression of work conducted by the author, that are of private and recommendatory nature. I believe the thesis by Jiang Xuehua on the theme Chinese borrowings in the language of the Russian immigrants on the basis of the memoirs prose corresponds to the basic requirements established by the order of the 1st of September 2016 on the order of awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University, and the degree applicant Jiang Xuehua deserves to be awarded the degree of Candidate of Philological Sciences, specialization 100201 Russian language. Article 11 of the above-mentioned order has not been violated by the author. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your comments. Let me answer while, thank you, Tatiana Igorevna. So, we decided that you will answer all the questions in the end. Thank you, Tatiana Igorevna, and I'd like to give the floor to Yelena Ivanovna. So all the answers will be given in the end, yes, to all 5 reviews. On C, speaking of the concept of the thesis, is speak of numerous memoir prose and closely and over 500 lists of Chinese origin, which cover different types of borings, direct and indirect. This creates a base to explore Sinicism, which entered the lexicon of the modern Russian language, and the individual varieties, ways of penetration to the Russian language, and process of adaptation in the Russian language. The result of this becomes guarantees novelty of the thesis, especially the studies on Russian lexicology. Science is the language of the Russian immigrant community have not been specially studied previously. So an important aspect is of historical conditions and circumstances that contribute to the development of the foreign language community, to the culture of China by Russian artists, Chekhov, Tolstoy, etc. The author demonstrates good knowledge in the theory of borings. There's different aspects in the for her analysis. The big work is 19 dictionaries regarding the time of fixation, composition of lexics, as 66 were borrowed indirectly, and speaking of separate words such as Mandarin, which seems very familiar, especially to those who used or maybe came across. So we came across this word before as a very table on pages 71, 72, which shows dynamics in the process of appearance and disappearance of Sinicism in the Russian language. Some have been recorded by all dictionaries, others were mentioned by only one of them. At the same time, however, it's not quite clear whether these data indicate on which stage of penetration or boring these Sinicism were they rooted or first appeared, because in terms of the time they were recorded, and because this is not quite clear, characterizing categories of Sinicism, the author as different types such as barbarism, and it was a good point here is including set expressions of the Chinese language, which maybe not always presented properly, with the exception of extended barbarism of phrases which contradict the study of lexical borings. For example, where are you going? To hobby. These are not lexical borings in the cold water. The author describes different aspects of borings, morphological its ability to form new words. That here is the time frame of certain words seem doubtful, as built in China in 1966 have no connection to the emigre epoch. The presentation is words where the author gives etymological reference, and often this data is the tasks set by the author correspond to the compositional structure of the text. Individual chapters are accompanied by the necessary conclusions, although some of the conclusions, especially for the second and third chapters, were included in the conclusion. In general, the tasks can be considered completed and the goal achieved, although not without flaws and errors. Let's call some of them. In our opinion, of the defended propositions of what is sinuses, that needs no proof, the definition of works done needed in any thesis. Second, the analysis of the material did not involve any works written by representatives of the Russian emigre community of the Carbine period and dated the first wave of immigration. The research is based exclusively on literature of the second half of the 20th century and beginning of the 21st century, while in the title of the thesis is Language of the Russian Immigrants of the First Half of the 20th Century. So the time frame is different. Next, in our opinion, we need strictness and certainty in the use of terms that have been developed in the linguistic tradition. Thus, the antonym, broad and narrow understanding of sinucism is applied 3 times to different criteria for selecting units for analysis. This discrepancy is unacceptable. In conclusion, there are, for example, the word pearl on page 69 is a fully absorbed Russian words, and on page 73 is included in the words have retained features of the original language. To me personally, the features of the source language without comments are not obvious. It's a specific, what is special about the word odatsan? Let's compare with patsan or pachkun. So word formation, morphological peculiarities here are not obvious. I beg your pardon. And in conclusion, the author repeats fragments of some texts which would be appropriate, not for the conclusion, and regularly demonstrate the validity of the given hypothesis, which is absent from this. So it seems to me that maybe I will repeat Tatiana Igorevna, that the work lacks characteristics of the used literature sources and contexts, which these words here will be give written evidence of immigrants who mastered the new and the new language or used it together with the Russian words. Is important is not perception of these words as own or commentaries. This would enable to judge, make judgment on freedom of speakers of Russian and at what degree separate language units are. However, this I have to say that the work contains a number of grammatical and in the text, and we have to call it technical break. Li Fein is absent. Missing. So let us call a technical break until Lu Fein is back. Oh my God. So she's getting back. So we have to take a technical break. When she is back, we will continue. Everybody is present. Hold on a second.
Подождите.
Елена Ивановна завершает свой...
Господи, как это техника, такая ненадежная вещь.
So
Наталья
unreliable.
Викторовна, повторите, пожалуйста, свои
Natalia Viktorovna,
слова, потому что
Скажите,
please
как там можно...
say again
у вас звук зависал.
when
Можете повторить?
the sound is
Конечно,
not good.
могу.
Of course,
Итак,
I
мы
can repeat.
продолжаем наше заседание.
So let us
После
continue
небольшого
our
технического
session
перерыва.
after a
Елена
short
Ивановна
technical break,
Селиверстова
and
свои слова
Елена
продолжит.
Ivanovna Sedeverstova
Елена
will
Ивановна, пожалуйста.
continue her presentation of her review.
Да-да.
I hope you can hear me. I'll try to speak up. In addition to these comments, I'd like to present two questions. First, to what extent does the genre of the analyzed literature determine the activity or involvement of sinologists? Is this process to some extent intentional or rather spontaneous? Nevertheless, the ethnographic description of everyday life may differ significantly from a work of art, both in terms of nomenclature of the vocabulary and its functions, as well as the way of it is introduced and commented on. Second, to what extent the Chinese nature of borrowed words was recognized by dictionary authors, and to what extent was this information communicated to the users? Is there a difference in the interpretation of words by dictionaries of different times? These comments, I have to finish, right? These comments do not reduce the overall positive impression of the work and do not deny the obvious merits of the thesis. The thesis by Jiang Xuehua on cynicism in the language of the Russian immigrants of the first half of the 20th century corresponds to the basic requirements established by the order of the 1st of September 2016, 6821/1, on the procedure for awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg State University. And the degree applicant, Jiang Xuehua, deserves to be awarded the degree of Candidate of Philological Sciences, Specialization 10-0201 Russian language. Article 11 of the above-mentioned order has not been violated by the... Thank you. Elena Ivanovna Xuehua will answer all the questions later, and I would like to give the floor to Lou Lefein. Lou Lefein, the floor is yours. Good afternoon. The thesis by Jiang Xuehua is devoted to the study of lexical borrowings of Chinese origin in the language of Russian immigrant community of the first wave, end of the 19th, first half of the 20th century. The thesis uses the descriptive and classification methods and methods of linguistic description, observation, introspection, analytical generalization, and etc. The work consists of an introduction, 3 chapters, a conclusion, and a list of references. The structure of the thesis is rational. The work is informative and relies on a large number of literary sources, as well as has a logical structure and clarity of thought. The Russian loanwords have been studied fruitfully in China, but the question of Chinese loanwords in the Russian language has not been studied enough in China. And there are no studies of words borrowed from Russian into Chinese or from the Chinese into Russian languages based on the material of memoir, prose, are absent altogether. Therefore, this study has certain novelty. While borrowings as universal language phenomenon exist in every language, and the results of the study have important practical significance for practical lessons in lexicology of the modern Russian language and translation from Chinese into Russian. The advantages of this work lie in the analysis of works by Christine Reformatsky and other distinguished Russian and foreign scientists. Are dedicated extra-linguistic causes of penetration of the Chinese vocabulary into the Russian language. Second, the author suggests classification by various characteristics of Russian words of Chinese origin, identified by sampling based on the material of the memoir prose of the Russian emigre community and texts describing the Russian emigre community in northeastern China. Third, the author considers regularities of borrowing on the graphic, phonetic, morphological, word building and semantic levels, and describes the main types of adaptation of borrowings in the modern Russian language. But the work has a number of drawbacks. For example, first, the author does not distinguish between the concepts of cynicism and borrowing. In the Russian text, there are cynicism, which is incorrect, non-substandard Russian expressions which reflect the influence of the Chinese language. This influence often manifested in their pronunciation as well as in their translation from Chinese into Russian. Second, the author considers proper names such as island and Lucin, this as exoticism, and cultural revolution, loose space, bamboo tablets, 4 families, swallows' nests, 21 demands as words borrowed by semantic calquing. Sang, third elder brother as borrowed word. Lane, face. Tashi Sanbai Show, 300 poems from the Tang Dynasty and others as barbarism. I don't share these propositions. Besides, there are spelling, grammar, and other errors in the work, but not too many of them. The thesis by Jiang Xuehua on Chinese borrowings in the language of the Russian immigrants on the basis of memoir prose of the first half of the 20th century corresponds to the basic requirements established by the order of the 1st of September 2016, number 6821/1, on the procedure of awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg State University. And the degree applicant, Jiang Xuehua, deserves to be awarded the degree of Candidate of Philological Sciences in Specialization 10-0201, Russian language, Article 11 of the specified order, has not been violated by the author. Thank you for your attention. So I only have one question. Should I ask it now or later? I only have one question. So, okay, please explain to me the difference between concept of cynicism and borrowings and borrowed words, and give examples. Thank you. Thank you, Lulithang. Let us continue. Marina Nikolaevna Priomsheva is absent. So, her review I shall read. The thesis is highly relevant. The relevance is beyond doubt. Chinese origin in the language of Russian immigrants. Evidences spread of such is valuable and significant, not only in sense of for linguistics. And novelty is explained by the fact that of rare material, use of rare material, barbarism, exotisms, and possible adaptations of foreign words, which define the possibility of using the results in practice. The composition of the work is very logical. The thesis is characterized by thoroughness, logic, sequence of presentation, and thoroughness in good linguistic analysis, which makes the degree of validity high. The advantages of the thesis include the method, and high level of Galina Nikolaevna, although undoubtedly with a broad understanding of cynicism, is by the author. That means all the native or borrowed Chinese words which entered the Russian language directly or indirectly, regardless of their source of origin, and belong to different dialects, regardless of the language of the national minorities in China, page 43. I cannot fully agree with this regular characteristic of the studied vocabulary as borrowed, since only a very small part of it, in fact, has undergone the process of adaptation. If the author sees fundamental differences between the terms borrowed and a foreign word, what is the main criteria for attributing the 448 lexical units out of 400 to proper borrowings? Let me remind that the author refers to such words as Bogdahan, Gaulan, Duban, Dada, Zin, and Harbin, etc. Moreover, in clause 254, a number of these words are described as exoticism, such as words as Gaulan, Dayan, Lama, Matan, and some others. In this connection, another question arises: does the author consider exoticism and barbarism to be borrowed words? And its formal criteria determined types of by period types, considers etymology, genetics of a number of words, analyzes the number of words in terms of their phonetic adaptation, etc. However, outside this study remains the question of the use of Chinesism. So why were they used? What is the role? We understand that this problem is not related to the goals and objectives of the study, but we would like to ask the author to describe, at least in the most general terms, the most striking functions of cynicism in the text under study. And this is this everyday anthroponymic geographical vocabulary. Perhaps the author used it to add an ethnic touch to their texts, and in which the use of such vocabulary had special artistic goals. These questions are aimed at clarifying the author's positions and possible research prospects, and that caused by interested reading of the thesis. In general, the work has been performed on a good scientific level, is characterized by the use of traditional linguistic methodology, a good, proper linguistic analysis of a significant amount of material, accuracy and a very attentive attitude to linguistic details, which of course deserve high praise. The thesis by Jiang Xuehua on Chinese borrowings in the language of the Russian immigrants on the basis of memoir prose of the first half of the 20th century fully corresponds to the basic requirements established by the order of the 1st of September 2016, number 6821/1, on the procedure for awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg State University. And the degree applicant, Jiang Xuehua, deserves to be awarded the degree of Candidate of Sciences, specialization 10-0201. Article 11 of the above mentioned has not been violated. And now, only my review. As I am also a member of the Dissertation Council, I shall read only the key points of my review. The work of Jiang Xuehua is modern and relevant since it is associated with lexical xenology and touches not only upon classification of borrowings, the reasons and ways of penetration of borrowings, but adaptation of borrowed elements, but also the work has practical significance because the lexical borrowings from a non-closely related language are studied on little studied material, and a good annex can be used for various purposes. These texts have never been analyzed by linguists, which provides the scientific novelty. I shall give 3 points, which the author has explained as the tasks of his study. First, Xuehua studies ways of Sinicism penetration to the Russian language, mechanisms of adaptation of the Chinese vocabulary at different levels, and finally, which in my opinion has not been successfully achieved, the role in the language consciousness of native Russian speakers. We shall get back to these provisions. Considers borrowings as process and as a result, and that's exactly how Xuehua analyzes her materials. She analyzes not only Sinicism as a result, but the ways of entering the Russian language and ways of adaptation, and that which is a process. Natalia Victorovna, we cannot hear you. This aspect of overview of lexicographic fixation of Sinicism in the Russian. Here she considers 3 types, 3 groups of dictionaries. Increased, put the sound on maximum. Let us call a technical break till. Can I continue? Please call a technical break and let us try to re-establish the connection. And what should I do? I call a technical break.
Наталья Викторовна, вы нас слышите?
Так, коллеги.
Dear colleagues,
Татьяна Игоревна, прошу, объявите технический перерыв.
Tatiana Igorevna, please call a
Я
technical
объявляю
break.
технический перерыв, потому что
I
Наталью Викторовну
announce a
вообще не
technical
слышно.
break because
Понятно.
unfortunately we cannot hear Natalia
Васильевна.
Viktorovna. Natalia Viktorovna, can you hear? Can you see me? Yes, you can. I can continue, right? Please announce the technical break finished. Dear colleagues, let me declare the technical break finished, and let me continue the presentation of my review. I got quite a number of questions of various sorts. First, speaking about the subject of her research, Jiang Xuehua promised to the reader to analyze the role of cynicism in the language consciousness of Russian speakers. And I even showed special interest in this and really expected it while reading the thesis. I was waiting for an experiment with native Russian speakers in which we could see how important or unimportant the borrowings from Chinese are for us. But my expectations did not come true. The text doesn't contain this, so it remains unclear what Jiang Xuehua meant when she proclaimed such a subject of her study as a component of the goal. Here, I'd like to get some explanations from the author on this, especially that the glossary of cynicism includes very different units. On the one hand, has words such as tea, silk, pearls, and ginseng, which are present in the vocabulary of any native speaker of Russian. On the other, familiar, but clearly not included in our active vocabulary. Words such as Gaolian, Li, Mahjong, and Junk, and on the third, unknown, Dayan, Kai, or Koutu. In my opinion, this material simply begs for systematization and evaluation by native speakers of Russian. But this has not been done by Jiang Xuehua, and it's absolutely not clear why Beijing duck was included in the list of Chinese borrowings. Second, was also somewhat expected for me, and here I repeat what was already mentioned by other council members, was very unexpected that proper names that make up exactly 4/5 of the research material, 400 units out of 500, also borrowings. Is it possible to analyze such material same line as lexical borrowings? In this case, can we talk about the reasons and ways of penetration of a unit into the recipient language? Analyze shifts of meaning. If really possible, how they got Chinese words such as Chesucha, silk, or fanza got into the Russian language. So I have same question about the words such as Beijing, Tibet, and Mao Zedong. This is history, not linguistics. And the linguist may be interested only in the transfer or in the rendering these names by means of Russian graphics and phonetics, or their adaptation to the Russian language. Why Jiang Xuehua was posted the most, almost the entire third chapter. This is certainly interesting, but this is a separate research task, quite far from analysis of lexical borrowings. My third question is, talking about the ways of adaptation of the Chinese words to the Russian linguistic system, Jiang Xuehua pronounces phonemic spellings of cynicism in the Russian language. Pages 98-99. The first of the epic, she describes everything related to pronunciation of individual sounds, lan, tofu. The second, phonemic, everything related to the phonemic composition of the word, kanja, kanka. I think that from the point of view of the Russian language, in both cases, we have the same type. In both groups, variants differ in phonemic or sound structure, which is not important in this case, such as hard l and soft l in lang, as well as o and oi, diphthong oi. The authors seen less strong difference than z, j, and k in the last pair of in the last opposition. Moreover, it's not clear how the third type of variance highlighted in the work as orthographic, such as Xilos, Tilos. In my opinion, all the three types the difference in pronunciation is equally reflected in and is related to the letter sound composition of the word. That I cannot accept this typology. I also have a number of minor comments. For example, it looks strange in the list of used dictionaries, not in the Scientific Linguistic Encyclopedia edited by Yartseva, and reference to unnamed list, though the definition of boring has no author. This is a typical student mistake, and it's a shame that doctoral thesis contains this error. Surprisingly, the list of written all the Chinese works, which I have already mentioned, but this is mentioned is in Russian. My question to Jiang Xuehua is Chinese authors never wrote about it in Russian. I certainly missed quantitative data, 5 units from 35 sources, but the presence of a typology simply calls for quantitative characteristic, and the work contains typology, proper lexical, semantic calquing, word forming calquing, exoticism, and barbarisms. How do these groups relate to each other? And where, by the way, are proper names in this typology? They are not a separate group, so presumably they are somehow distributed among these 5. So the question is how. In addition, there is the division of considered sinuses into direct and indirect borings, recorded and non-recorded in dictionaries. And again, the question of their quantitative ratio remains unanswered. Availability of digital data would certainly make Jiang Xuehua conclusions more convincing. And the last point is, but work is very poorly formatted. For example, there are 15 extra pages where I deleted all unnecessary spaces, but all such questions, no matter how serious they are unavoidable when you familiarize yourself with work through the large array of new data. It's a lot of interesting studies can be conducted with this material by Jiang Xuehua, and the overall positive assessment of the thesis under consideration was not affected. To sum it up, I'd like to say that the thesis by Jiang Xuehua meets the basic requirements established by the order of the 1st of September 2016, number 6821/1, on the procedure for awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg State University. And the degree applicant Jiang Xuehua deserves to be awarded the degree of Candidate of Philological Sciences, Specialization 10-0201 Russian language. Article 11 of the above-mentioned order has not been violated by the degree applicant. I am done, and I invite Jiang Xuehua to answer all the questions and comments, so your task will be easier. Welcome, Jiang Xuehua. The floor is yours. Dear members of the Dissertation Council, thank you for your reviews of my work, and for especially the questions and comments that are useful to me, which seem very important and valuable. I accept all your questions and comments with great gratitude, and I will try to answer some of them. So first, I will explain notions of cynicism, borrowing, and borrowed words. Thank you for this question. It's methodologically very important for understanding my work as clarification of terminology. The definition, understanding is both as a process and as a result, characterized by phenomena, different language of not only the lexics, and attempts by different languages to clarify these terms of borrowing in detail described in the first chapter of the thesis. According to Leonid Petrovich Krysin and the complete dictionary of linguistic terms Borrowing is a process of transfer various items from one language to another. The switch of units of one language to another as a consequence of interaction of peoples and languages, as well as the unit itself, which has entered the Russian language as a result of such transfer. Different elements are units of different levels of language structure, phonology, morphology, syntax, vocabulary, and semantics. The borrowed words are words that have entered a language from another language, related and as a result of communication between some peoples, and reflect diversity of political, cultural, economic, household, and other relations between language groups, and the facts of ethnic contacts. The process of borrowing in each nation and culture is carried out differently. In short, in linguistics, borrowing is a process of assimilation by one language of a word, expression, or meaning of another language, as well as the result of this process, the borrowed word itself. Depending on the donor language, borrowings in Russian are called Anglicism, Germanisms, as well as Sinicism, and the like. As for the concept of cynicism, it has already been described, so I will not repeat. It's in a wide sense. So, and I will talk about it later. Next, there's an important question by distinguished opponents on if proper names and geographical names can be described as borrowings. The answer is complex and depends on how the borrowing process is understood. If by borrowing we understand the process by which the language accepts and some foreign elements, the emphasis on the result or a foreign word in the language, then we must assume that words are borrowed because these are words of foreign origin which are accepted by a foreign language. So the process is considered in the present work. However, a slightly different point of view is also possible. If we understand borrowings as the assimilation of a foreign word by the recipient language system, then it's necessary to specify this process in relation to proper names. Proper names are subject not only to the formal assimilation, phonetic, grammatical, and word formation assimilation, but also never to the semantic assimilation. The absence of any semantic adaptation is connected with essential feature of proper names that designate unique objects and have single reference. That is why a number of linguists do not talk about borrowing proper names, but only about their transfer by means of another language, and believe that any foreign proper name can be rendered by means of another language if necessary. But at that, it does not become an element of the other language. It's not borrowed. From the point of view, it's possible to borrow nouns and transfer by means of another language proper names. In our work, we considered the appearance of proper names in the Russian language as a process of borrowing, despite there's no semantic adaptation, because we believe it's important in this case to have a formal adaptation of these language units to the system of the Russian language. And one of the tasks of this work is to describe features of formal adaptation. So it's very important to study the phonetic names, their proper names. Their appearance in the Russian language is transcribed on transliterated form, and the advantage of practical transcription in rendering of cynicism. In addition, we believe that as a result of such phonetic, grammatical, and word formation assimilation, proper names are included in the Russian language, so it can be considered borrowings. Asked a question is names of mountains and lakes considered borrowings, names of proper names and other hydronyms, toponyms, and troponyms, several special groups of vocabulary and of any language. We understand, of course, that their inclusion in our analysis of borrowed cynicisms should be specified and justified in more detail. We included these words in our work because, as we can see from our study, it's an integral part of cynicisms in general and plays a significant role in the language of Russian immigrants, creates a cultural and linguistic environment, and sometimes served as a marker of the language situation. I fully agree with my opponents that should study as because they are not strictly borrowed, but proper names, but rendered by means of another language, but still add certain phonetic and morphological adaptation. Among proper names, it is possible conventionally to identify in the recipient language. I fully agree that I should have put them into separate section and justify the use of this vocabulary in my work. Thank you. Natalia Viktorovna asked a question about the role in the language consciousness of Russian, the study of the role of cynicism in the consciousness of native Russian speakers, indeed designated as an integral component of the goal of the work. The study was partly undertaken in the work. The study of the composition of the thematic groups and the process semantic adaptation of cynicism in terms of understanding the place occupied by cynicisms in the Russian language picture of the world, with conceptual gaps filled. It was found especially in memoir literature borrowed from Chinese into Russian designation of titles, professions. This indeed includes borrowings of different times and degrees of adaptation. But I'd like to emphasize that dictionaries based on selection of cynicism from the memoir literature of the corresponding period. It's obvious that the relevance of these borrowings, the sphere of neologization and obsolescence, as well as entering the active or passive vocabulary, the significance of the language picture of the world that would be in memoir literature, all of whom have lived a certain part of their life in China, and speakers of modern Russian living in Russia. Therefore, the tasks of the thesis were primarily to identify, classify, and analyze the material obtained. For this stage of the study, we relied on material of 30 dictionaries and their fixation in different languages. In my further research, I hope to conduct such an experiment in the future. This is a very powerful task, and we understand the need to address this task that will make our work more credible. The second question about orthoepis and phonemic spellings of Russian cynicism. I agree with Natalia Viktorovna that the so-called orthoepic and phonemic variants can be put into two types: graphophonetic variations that differ in sound composition, and the second group of graphical, as this term rather than spelling, different by spelling. For example, dilos and dilos. So difference in the graphic conveying the sound composition. Here is closely connected with phonetics and other graphic rendering as cynicism entails a change in its phonetic appearance. For example, ha bin ha or er bin. The presence of writing with dashes, spaces, and spaces could only claim to be graphic variation, but the appearance of the sound E before P in or R in Russian makes it this phonemic. As for the quantitative ratio on page 76 of the thesis, there's no border. We simply listed, give some examples: calculus 12 and barbarism 51 units. And on page 67 of the thesis, we emphasize that the collected licks of the Chinese origin recorded in memoirs and fiction of the Russian immigrant community on the 66 years are indirect borrowings. Other words, which entered the Russian language by direct borrowing, through direct borrowing. Thank you very much for all the comments. Let us move on. Marina Nikolaevna asked about the function of using cynicism in the studied sources. So this question remains open. Traditionally, foreign language is in other languages by degree of adaptation. The acceptor lingual, Irina Vyacheslavona Marinova, is the use of foreign word is a wider scope compared to the borrowed word, because the borrowed words by assimilation is of foreign origin. Borrowed words are considered as foreign words, and its adaptation in the recipient language and the linguistic borrowings is understood as a foreign word, which corresponds to the adaptation criteria. As for the term lexical borrowing, the term is used in the work in several senses, and I should have explain this better. The lexical borrowings, first of all, opposed to semantic borrowings. Proper borrowings are considered words which have been assimilated in the recipient language. The graphical, phonetic, and semantic word formation, morphological, and syntactic. In the context of the thesis, where is characterized by borrowing, the term borrowed has a very broad sense. Is a Chinese origin described units, and within this corpus we define lexical morphological borrowings. And there was another question about exoticism and barbarism. From the point of borrowed word or expression is its adaptation by the recipient language. Many linguists, for example, Leonid Petrovich Krysin and Marina Fomina, together with proper borrowed words, define such linguistic types of borrowings as exotic lexicism and barbarisms, and exoticism have no equivalence in the recipient language, and preserve as is phoneme as etc. Recorded in a particular and define nationally marked the use of borrowings in the nominative function. The barbarisms not are considered in the theory of, because this phenomena should be studied as a process of transfer of foreign agents on the of another language. There's a foreign lexics that does not change its phonetic, which disrupts the language norms, and have not fully adapted by the recipient language. In that sense, the general given general characteristics of barbarisms included in the total corpus of described lexical borrowings, and transferred to, on the other hand, and this is emphasized in the work, barbarisms are only conventionally be classified as borrowings because they have limited sphere of application and remain outside the scope of the Russian language, and the function considered language is they have in of the studied memoir text. They study the potential aspects of the language peculiarities which can be used to see implementation of language potential. The important function of the use of cynicism is divided into cognitive, nominative, derivative, etc. Borrowed words have no cognitive function, is as a function of interpreting foreign facts, a cumulative function of storing and transferring knowledge about reality, traditions, culture, the history of the people and national consciousness. The nominative function allows us to define a term, give names to new objects, concepts, and phenomena, and leads to the appearance of new words. In some words, the nominative function is merged with the character. The function refers to the use of linguistic units. It describes use of linguistic units in speech to describe and characterize people, objects, and phenomena or reality. One of the important functions of cynicism in the modern Russian communication, but this feature is already another level of derivation in Russia. They are now actively involved in word or formation of new lexical meanings. Chinese loanwords and their derivatives exhibit at the level of phrases, text, scope, and the use of cynicism, stylistic, text forming, and genre, idiom, Chinese borrowings in the language of Russian immigration and text describing the process of immigration as studied in both linguistic and historical and cultural aspects. In particular, the methods of adaptation, as well as geographical, become a background, have the connotation meaning. Irina Ivanovna asked the question about the use of cynicism and the difference in interpreting by dictionaries, the awareness of the authors of dictionaries of the Chinese origin may occur either in etymological impurities stated from China, but not in all the dictionaries. The etymological area is present, even as optional, because the description of the etymology of a word is not part of the dictionary, and in the interpretation contains elements of Chinese or in China, etc. The question about the different lexicographic presentation of cynicism in dictionaries of different periods indeed is very interesting from the point of view of dynamics of functioning of individual cynicism in the Russian language. Such cases are undoubtedly noted and can be explained by both linguistic and non-linguistic reasons. The example of reducing the number of meanings and borrowed Chinese noun panza in the dictionaries of foreign words edited by Mikhail Valeryevich Popov. They published in 1911. The word panza has two meanings. As a Chinese residential building, usually with walls made of clay and straw, panzi. And the second meaning is a thin and light Chinese silk cloth, like punctual. In the dictionary of foreign words by Leonid Krysin, the word panza is recorded in one meaning: a small Chinese house of stone or straw, the frame of wooden pillars. Due to the deterioration of Sino-Soviet relations, the import of fabric, so the language disappeared from the dictionaries. The second question about the role of genre in the activity involving cynicism. Thank you. The aspect of studying cynicism is certainly very important and interesting, and I will try to pay attention to it in my future work. At this stage of research, we can only say that according to my observations, the share of warrants in the text of ethnographic and everyday content is higher than in the artistic texts. And all other comments of distinguished members of the Dissertation Council, I am grateful, accept with gratitude, and will try to take them into account in my future work. Once again, let me thank you for all the critical remarks and advice. Many thanks to everybody. Thank you, Xuehua, for your answers. Dear members of the Dissertation Council, are you satisfied with the answers to your questions and comments? Tatiana Igorevna, are you satisfied? Yes, I did not hear any characteristics of the authors of memoirs. So a minimal characteristic would be a description of these people, how well they knew the Chinese language. Some authors, all authors, lived in Harbin or in the northeast of China. Almost all of them did not know Chinese. So they did not know Chinese. They lived in China, but by pronunciation, the local people, they appeared different language phenomena. I see. So this is important. This is important. But thank you for useful advice. I will all the authors of that period. Elena Ivanovna, Are you satisfied? Yes, I am satisfied. Thank you. Lulifin, are you satisfied? Yes. Thank you for your answers. Thank you. Now, well, all the council members are satisfied. Irina Vasilievna, do we have any external, no external questions? Then let us give the floor to the academic advisor Jiang Xuehua, Tatiana Vsevolodovna Rождественская. Please tell us about your student. I do not have the right to characterize the thesis, so I'll tell how our work progressed. I must say that Xuehua, of course, faced big difficulties in the beginning when she became a doctoral student, not because of practical knowledge of language, but with scientific literature in Russian. And she's gone a long way in this direction, being very hardworking and patient. She worked on a theme which I proposed, and which she considered interesting, was interesting for her. The issue of borrowings from the language under study. So the theme was interesting. She worked very hard. She tried really hard, and she was very patient. And I think that with this thesis, with her thesis, she created a basis for successful work as a scientist, as a researcher, and as a teacher. Thank you, Tatiana Vsevolodovna. Dear colleagues, we have the opportunity, since we're working in the remote access mode. Dear council members and listeners, do you have any unanswered questions? Maybe something you didn't like, or maybe something we should repeat. Tatiana Igorevna, do you have? No, everything is clear. Elena Ivanovna, all is well. Lulifin, no, I don't have. And me neither, everything is clear. Then we have the opportunity, dear members of the Dissertation Council, to take a technical break before we vote if we need it. Not for voting, but for discussion before we vote. Do you think we need, are we ready to vote, or should we switch the sound off and discuss? Yelena Ivanovna, what do you think? No, we don't need. Kaligana, no, we don't need. Lulifane? I don't care. I suggest that we proceed straight to voting. So, dear colleagues, the most critical moment of our session is coming. Please make sure that video and sound, you have them on. Everything is. Can we all see and hear each other? I think we can. Yes, we can. Yes, we can all see and hear each other. Excellent. I now put a question of awarding to Jiang Xuehua the degree of Candidate of Philological Science Academic Specialization 100201 Russian language to the open individual vote. Let me remind you that a decision of the Dissertation Council shall be considered positive if at least 3 members of the council voted for it. There are 4 members. So let us, Tatiana Igorevna Afanasьevna, your opinion. I'm for, the applicant deserves. Yelena Ivana Silverstova, positive. My opinion is positive. Marina Nikolaevna is absent. Lulifin, your opinion? My opinion is positive. And me, as the chairman, Natalia Viktorovna Bogdanova Beglaryan, also believe that Xuehua deserves to be awarded the degree. So, this very dear colleagues and guests, let me inform you that out of 4 members present at the who took part in voting, 4 voted for, no one voted against, and no one abstained. The decision to award to Jiang Xuehua the degree of Candidate of Philological Sciences, Academic Specialization 10-0201 Russian Language has been made. Dear colleagues, once again, since our meeting was held in the remote access mode, do the Dissertation Council members or the applicant and others present have any questions regarding the procedure of the meeting? Ludophane, do you have any questions or comments? No, I don't. As well. Tatiana Igorevna? No. Yelena Ivanovna? No questions. Xuehua? Is everything? No. I just wanted to just hold on a second. I shall give you the floor, but now everything is clear to you and you're satisfied with everything. Okay, then I'd like to give the floor to the degree applicant Jiang Xuehua for the closing remarks. Let me express my sincere gratitude to the Department for support of Dissertation Council for preparation. Let me give express gratitude to all members of the Dissertation Council for their reviews. And I see the drawbacks of my work, and I'd like to express my deep and sincere gratitude to my academic advisor, Tatiana Vsevolodovna, for all her help. And also, I would like to thank Marina Nikolaevna for participating in the council meeting when one of the members could not participate for a good reason. I'd like to sincerely thank my colleagues and everybody who supported me and all the doctoral students at the Department of the Russian Language. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Xuehua. We congratulate you on being awarded the academic degree of Philological Sciences. I think everyone present will support me. Thank you for the participation, and I declare the session closed. Please stop the online broadcasting. Thank you.